Packed away in the Inflation Reduction Act was actually financing for President Biden's Build Back Better agenda on energy. Now, this included $369 billion in new green energy subsidies and other funds. And a big part of that agenda was actually electric vehicles. But those electric vehicles are now running into some real serious problems of their own. The market, it turns out, is heavily dependent on China, and energy-hungry cities in the United States are now limiting how people can even recharge the batteries for those vehicles. Here to speak with us about this is David Blackman. He's an energy writer and consultant who spent 40 years in the oil and gas business. Hey, David Blackman, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Thank you for having me.
You know, first of all, I was just doing some research on this. The Inflation Reduction Act. America was told we need to reduce inflation. Everybody needs to get together on it. It turns out they bankrolled the energy policies in Biden's Build Back Better program. How did this happen? Like, what was it in that was kind of sleight of hand snuck into it?
Well, it's about 400 pages of text in a 1,200-page bill. Yeah. $369 billion altogether in green energy subsidies and tax incentives designed to promote, mainly be available for electric vehicles, wind and solar power. But also there's provisions in there to subsidize geothermal projects, carbon capture projects. We just saw a big contract on carbon capture awarded last week. And it's this whole array of stuff. It's a green energy dream world out there within the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, in terms of what it did for electric vehicles, like what does that mean? Like what did it include for electric vehicles in particular?
Well, it includes tax breaks for investments in the factories and in the supplies, the hardware necessary to build the things. It includes massive tax breaks for consumers who buy electric vehicles, as long as the batteries in those vehicles meet domestic content requirements that the Energy Department is currently trying to find a workaround so they don't have to enforce that piece of it. And so it all adds up to probably $80–90 billion of that bill, of the $369 billion targeted to electric vehicles. And that $369 billion is really a very low estimate of what it's ultimately going to cost us, because a lot of those provisions are open-ended, and there are estimates out there that really that bill is going to end up costing our budget in the United States federal government well over $1 trillion before all is said and done.
Well, I know a lot of people would say, well, it's going to save us in the long term. We're switching from gas vehicles to electric vehicles. This is the future. It's going to save you money in the long run. What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, it's already not saving you money because, all this money is debt funded. So it builds our national debt. It costs us, the federal government has higher interest payments now, specifically related to the Inflation Reduction Act. That is all very inflationary. It's made it harder for the Federal Reserve to get inflation under control. And it's increasing the cost of energy, everything you consume related to energy, your electric bills, your gasoline when you fill up your car, the charges. Charging an electric vehicle is not free, folks. You have to pay for that too. And the rates for doing that have gone up massively since that bill was passed. So it's already costing you money, and those costs are going to continue to rise over the next decade. And the president essentially admitted that a couple of weeks ago.
Well, one thing that I think shocked a lot of people too is states like California, which were leading the way on new energy vehicles, they were putting restrictions on people's ability to charge their cars, right. Because of the energy shortages. And I mean, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Is that a serious blow to the electric vehicle market? Is that just a speed bump on the road to the green future? How do you interpret this?
Well, first of all, it's absolutely necessary for California to, deny people the ability to charge their cars or ask them not to charge their cars during peak hours of power load on the grid because the grid can't handle the additional load. It's going to discourage sales of electric vehicles, although proponents will tell you otherwise. But that's just how the market works. It's going to increase the cost of electric vehicles. It raises the cost of making them. And it's all because none of this was really thought through. There's no overarching strategy here. It's just a bill that created big pots of money for people to rush in and gain access to try to build companies with. But there's no overarching plan of how it all gets integrated together without causing all these big, massive displacements and deprivations for consumers. And, we're seeing more and more of those impacts all the time.
Well, that brings up another issue, because if you listen to the narratives, the idea is this, that pretty soon it's going to be all green energy. There's going to be birds and butterflies flying everywhere around like the solar panels and so on. It's this beautiful idea of a future, that they try to present us with. Everyone's driving electric vehicles. There's zero emissions. What a great thing. But then, based on the way we're seeing it, it seems that they're also saying that the grid itself could not be sustainable if everyone drove these vehicles. They're also saying there are not enough rare earth minerals on Earth to even build them. And that brings up the other issue of China, which is the market's apparently very heavily dependent on China. I mean, what does that look like?
Yes, China controls the supply chains for the critical minerals that go into the making of the batteries. China controls the processing of about 70%, for example, of lithium, mined lithium on Earth. It controls the supply chains for cobalt and a lot of the other minerals that go into the making of those batteries. And it's not just electric vehicles. The wind turbines, the blades, are largely made up of these rare earth elements in order to reduce the weight of the blades. And so it's critical to the wind turbines. It's critical to solar panels. All those metals go into solar panels as well. And China controls the supply chains and the manufacture of all that stuff. And, the president promised 2 years ago to mount a whole of government effort to onshore the mining for those minerals and the supply chains for them, and has made virtually no progress in that regard. And because it's a very difficult thing to do for government to try to control all this stuff. You just can't do it from Washington.